We're hit 6 o'clock. If you're happy for me to start the recording,
Yes, go ahead.
I will make a start now. Bear with me a second. Recording should have started now, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Homes and Safe Communities on 9th of March 2022. May I please remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand function. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues to the chairman or the Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or Democratic Officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so they can at least hear and be heard. Okay, thank you. On to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Have we received any?
We've had one through, Chair, from Colette Island, the representative from Citizens Advice Cardiff and the Vale.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of January 2022. Are we all happy with these minutes?
Movie note, yeah.
Okay, so moving now to, were you all happy to do that?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any? I'm assuming that's a big fat no. All right then, thank you. So the next item is local housing market assessment. If we could take that, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll lead on the report, but Nick Jones is here. As you'll see, attached to the report is a very technical document regarding the assessment methodology for local housing market assessments, and Nick has been quite heavily involved in that process. But just also, can I just point out that this is a reference from Cabinet of the 14th of February. Excuse me for sniffing my way through. I've got a cold at the moment. This is a referral from Cabinet on the 14th of February, and just to point out, the Cabinet at its meeting did amend one of the recommendations that you can see in the full report that Cabinet looked at. That second recommendation was that the Local Housing Market Assessment 2021 be referred to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee for consideration. Should the Scrutiny Committee make no recommendation to Cabinet, the Local Housing Market Assessment be agreed and adopted as outlined in Appendix A to the report. I thought it was just important just to flag, if members had looked at the report, that there was a difference between the initial recommendation and the final recommendation that was agreed by Cabinet. If I can take you through the report under Section 1 background, the first part of the report talks about the statutory and policy framework relating to the Council's housing strategic function and the role of the local housing market assessment in that function. We talk around the fact that the local housing market assessment also touches upon planning policy Wales, and specifically technical advice note 2, which provides guidance on the role of the planning system in delivering affordable housing, and also a requirement obviously on Welsh local authorities to undertake a local housing market assessment. And the assessment itself just provides us with a comprehensive understanding of our local housing market and provides our robust evidence base for making those strategic housing and planning decisions. Under Section 2, key issues for consideration. The methodology for undertaking a local housing market assessment was developed in 2014 by Welsh Government, and the methodology that we followed in 2021 aligns obviously with the same work that we did in 2019. That is a requirement to undertake a local housing market assessment every 2 years. Just for clarity, the local housing market assessment considers and reviews the housing market across the Vale of Glamorgan, and it's across all tenures, including home ownership, private renting and affordable housing. So in addition to that review, the most important aspect, and I suppose the aspect that is most publicly discussed, is the need for affordable housing, because I think many people assess the need for gaps in housing market provision, the need for affordable housing, whether that be social renting or whether that be low cost home ownership or whether that be intermediate rent products. Purpose of the local housing market assessment, as I say, is and certainly in terms of the definition for affordable housing, is identified under 2.3, and affordable housing is defined as housing provided to those whose needs are not met by the market, and as I say, includes both social rented housing, which includes obviously council housing, housing association developments, but also intermediate housing products and low cost of ownership. Under 2.4, we sort of state there what I've just mentioned, that historically, I suppose people think of housing needs and they think of social housing, council housing, affordable housing, based on, I suppose, fairly stereotypical view of that tenure. However, what we point out is, particularly in the Vale of Glamorgan, and we've seen that over the last 2 or 3 years, that the current economic climate, increasing housing costs and financial difficulties are showing that people are unable to afford, for example, home ownership if that was their chosen option. And in terms of increases in terms of rents above housing allowance levels, private sector rents are also accelerating to the point that quite a significant number of the Vale population are not in a position to afford some of those market rents. As with our previous local housing market assessments, we've identified 12 sub-market areas within the Vale, and they're outlined in table at 2.6. 2.7 talks around the calculation that we carry out, and I suppose the most important factor, and certainly as part of an executive summary, is the table below that at the bottom of 2.7. So the local housing market assessment 2021 has identified that for the Vale of Glamorgan for the next 5 years, each year, including the backlog need, because obviously previous assessments have identified need that have not been met since then, that the net annual need for affordable housing in the Vale of Glamorgan is 1,205 units. Now, that's a substantial increase on the 900 or so units that we identified in 2019. And in 2.8, we reflect on the factors that may well be driving that significant increase in affordable housing requirement over the next 5 years. And I think you can see there, in terms of social housing, social rented housing, a net annual need of 915 units per year for each of the next 5 years. But what we are also seeing are increased demand and requirement for shared housing or low cost home ownership products, and also substantial increase in intermediate rents. And intermediate rent is a level which is affordable below a market rent. The rest of the report itself talks around where the need is greatest. So general needs property show the greatest need. In terms of the areas, as we probably know, the largest two towns in the Vale in terms of Barry and Penarth, where that majority of need has been identified. And in terms of property size, and as you members will be aware, certainly in terms of development programs in the last couple of years and development programs going forward in terms of social housing, the need for 1 and 2 bedroom homes remain our highest demand. Going on, the work that we're doing at the moment will be supplemented. As you know, we're undertaking an older person's housing and accommodation assessment at the moment, because we identify over the next 30 years a huge requirement for older persons accommodation, and obviously having to start to strategically plan for that need going forward. And then, as I say, going through the rest of the report, there's much more technical information contained within that. We also talk about some of the issues and concerns with regard to the existing methodology. Welsh Government have reviewed the methodology, and from the next assessment, a new methodology will be adopted for us to identify the gaps in terms of the market, which may influence and hopefully will simplify the processing, coming to the figures that I've just mentioned earlier. And I think finally at 2.20, and I think you may well have heard us say this previously when we've talked about the local housing market assessment. I think it's important that members realise this is much more of an art than a science. It's a headline net housing figure, and shouldn't be viewed as a definitive measure of need or as a target figure. And of course, a number of factors will influence the general delivery of affordable housing, but it provides the strategic basis for which to plan. It provides the basis for which colleagues in our planning department use in order to look at the local development plan. It assists us in our negotiations and discussions with the private sector in terms of new build and new housing. And we also talk about some of the other issues which affect the ability to deliver. And we talk there around some of the subsidies that would be required in order to deliver the affordable element of that provision. I intend to stop there at this stage. I don't intend to take you through the report, which, as you can see, is over 50 pages long. It's very detailed. It gives a lot more information, certainly at the sort of sub-market level, as I say, and I'm sure members across the Vale will be interested in those figures for their specific sub-market areas. Demand is across the Vale. I mentioned Barry and Penarth. There is significant demand both in the urban and the rural settings. And as I say, the fact that there's been a substantial increase in that affordable need, up to, as I say, 1,205 units, a substantial increase from the 900 or so units we identified only 2 years ago, I think paints a picture of the stark housing crisis that we currently have in the Vale, and lead to the fact that, you know, our housing waiting list numbers have increased, I think, by 1,000 in the last year or so. I'll leave it there. I don't know if Nick has anything to add specifically in terms of some of the detail that might be helpful, but I'm sure, you know, either of us be happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Nick, do you have anything to add?
I think if people have got questions about the calculations or the specifics, hopefully I can try and sort of clarify or add a bit more meaning to that. But yeah, I probably unless you wanted me to, I wouldn't go into any more detail on the specific methodology now, other than to sort of emphasize the point that Mike has already made, really, is that this is a prescribed methodology that we've followed, really, and other local authorities will follow the same methodology. So the information can be aggregated by Welsh Government or others across Wales if they need to, really. And lastly, the fact that, as Mike also mentioned, the methodology is changing shortly. So the next time we do this in 2 years' time, it may be that the results are slightly different, and we'll have to sort of take a note of caution, really, when comparing the previous information. For the last 4 times that we've carried out this exercise, we've followed the same methodology. So you are comparing apples with apples if you look back across previous housing need figures.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I can see Councillor Parker has his hand up. Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, one of the main concerns we're all going to have is the increase in construction costs, which certainly since March have probably gone up 10 to 15%, which is a great worry for Nick and for Michael. My sort of question and sort of hint to say, are we taking on board the likely increase in costs over the next 12 months to arrive at a more strategic policy, bearing in mind that I think if I was addressing you next year, we would probably find a 20% increase in construction costs. Thank you.
I think if I can respond to that, we are seeing issues and difficulties with the construction sector at the moment. So, for example, the Hayes Road development that we recently went out to tender for, we only received 2 tenders. Bearing in mind it's a significant scheme, and in terms of those companies that did tender, their tenders were in excess of our previously estimated development budget for the scheme. We're seeing that also in a lot of our improvement program work as well, where companies have come to us and effectively said that they can no longer honour tenders given those rising costs. And I suppose given where we are going to be over the coming months and potentially next couple of years regarding fuel and other costs, I would imagine that pressure will be even greater. I'm not sure if Marcus will have noted, but clearly I would think discussions with private developers we will see indications from those developers around how we continue to deliver the percentages of affordable housing on new developments, because of course those developers will be arguing equally that there are burgeoning costs which impinge on their ability to deliver the percentages of affordable housing. But I suppose that's slightly offset, I suppose, in terms of some of the increases in housing market values that we're also seeing in the Vale at the moment, with the Vale being either number 1 or number 2, I think, in terms of prices in terms of new build. But I think you're right. I think it's from a strategic perspective, is very uncertain at the moment. But we certainly, in terms of our housing business plan, we're certainly working on the assumption that those development costs are going to increase. I think you mentioned 15%. We've seen some individual items in terms of material cost, even in excess of 15%. And whilst we thought Brexit was going to be the issue there in terms of price inflation, we're seeing lots of other factors coming to the fore at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I mean, that really confirms what we all need to consider. I go out for timber frame housing prices, and some of those have gone up 20-25%, which is almost unbelievable, but unfortunately it's reality, and that's going to happen with the private sector as well. So they're going to be coming back to you saying, well, we can't afford to build all these affordable houses. So we do need to keep a very careful eye, which I know you will, and obviously, if I can give any help, be delighted to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Parker.
Okay. Do we have any other questions on that item? I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to ask, is everybody happy to go with the recommendations?
Yeah, move we note, Chair.
Yeah, okay, all right. We've got a seconder for that?
Happy to second.
Oh. Okay, thank you. So agenda item 5 is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period 1st of April 2021 to 31st of January 2022. And I believe Carolyn is going to take this.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Okay, so with regard to the revenue budget, it's projected that most services will outturn on target. However, the youth offending service is projecting £100,000 underspend at year end. There's some staff vacancies and the impact of COVID as reasons for that. With regard to the HRA, due to the capital slippage, and we're now in this report reporting £5 million, this will be a required reduction in the revenue contribution to capital, and therefore no loans will be raised this year, and also the level of the HRA reserve at the year end will stay the same, as we will not need to draw down from that reserve. So this has been factored into the revised business plan that was approved by Council on Monday night. So we have taken account of this going forward into next year. The capital slippage is detailed by scheme in the body of the report. And the issues have been reported to committee previously, following on from the last item, increased costs, contractor issues on site, trying to get contractors to carry out schemes, and earlier on in the year, obviously access issues where people weren't too keen on having contractors coming into their homes. So again, to reiterate, we again said in the last committee that the schemes will be undertaken, they will be carried out, and we do have some start dates, but it's more of a sort of a reprofiling. So as I say, just to confirm that we are trying, but they are very challenging circumstances, as I say, in the construction industry at the moment, has been reported. So that's just a rundown of the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Tumbleweeds. Okay. Well, I don't have any.
Chair, can I just ask one question, please? Is that all right? Sorry,
yes,
Chair. My phone rang, so I was disturbed. Carolyn, did you say that there's an underspend in youth budget due to? I thought you did. Can I just confirm that, please, Carolyn?
Yes, I did. Yes, it's £100,000 projected underspend.
Okay, and is that movable at all, or is it restricted totally to that budget? And if so, have we got anything projected in terms of next year's expenditure?
Well, I think what we'll do with that underspend is we will keep it and transfer it into reserve. So it's just to reassure that money won't be lost. And I suppose it depends next year, because, they've got staff vacancies. I think across the council, people are having issues recruiting. It does seem to be quite difficult at the moment. So, I'm sure they will be going out and proactively trying to recruit into those posts. So I suppose we need to see how that sort of, the employment market goes next year. But hopefully they will be able to recruit into those posts. But as I say, the money's not lost out of the service. We are going to transfer that money into reserves.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. And then did you mention that there's this shortage with regards to contractors and building and everything else? Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how we can link that with some of our youth offending service and the new PRU and all of the skill shortages. There's got to be some marriage here, hasn't there, really, Carolyn, in terms of all our apprenticeships, all our young people here in the Vale of Glamorgan. Maybe for another committee, food for thought, but for me, there's definitely some sort of discussion that needs to take place here with regards, as I said, skill shortage and all of our fantastic young people who want employment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can feed that back to our O&D department. I'm not sure. I think we do take on apprentices, don't we, Mike? Anyway, we do sort of have a scheme, but certainly we can feed that back to the department and see if there's anything more we can do.
Lovely.
Mike, do you want to comment any more, Mike, on that?
Just to comment that the issues that Councillor Nugent-Finn raised are identified within our housing and business building services plan that's later on the agenda. We identify service risks. We have identified, obviously, and I think Councillor Parker raised the same point earlier, that one of the issues for us is our capital programme and risks to both spend and burgeoning costs. In terms of apprentices, clearly we have within housing a very successful relationship with our developers who are building our new council housing, and we've got some good successes there with regard to training, both in terms of work that we do with our NEETs group, but also in terms of some more structured training, I suppose, in terms of apprenticeships. So there are pockets of practice, but I think it's probably a nationwide issue. It's not confined to the Vale, it's not confined to Wales. I think resourcing into new employment opportunities, apprenticeships, I think will be a major factor in the coming years too. But it's not something I think that's going to be addressed in the next 12 months or even probably the next 2 years. It's certainly, I think, something as we identified in the construction sector itself. There are supply and staffing issues, and I suppose it's about how we use as part of the circular economy, a part of our buying power. How do we support that? So, for example, optimised retrofit scheme at the moment on a number of properties in the council stock. Some of our contractors, we've assisted them in terms of them going back to college, because that's another issue. In some of the technologies, people will need retraining. So, of course, there are pockets, as Carolyn has mentioned. I think our OD team are working extremely hard in looking at apprentice opportunities, and we certainly link in with colleagues in children's services, for example. I know you'll be aware of Councillor Nugent-Finn in terms of opportunities for some of the children stroke adults that we are responsible for with our corporate parenting hat as well.
Absolutely, yeah, lovely. And you know, there's always this opportunity with FE, particularly Bowery College. You run a fantastic construction course. You know, we've got some real talent coming through there at the minute, Mike and Caroline. You know what I mean? And desperately looking for employment. You know, there's, as I said, there's got to be this relationship somewhere, hasn't there, between the deficit and what we know is out there, all in the Vale of Glamorgan. You know, it's really exciting.
I think, I agree. It's something that I know that we're looking at as a city region, and the opportunities that we have as 10 local authorities. And I know that, for example, when you're looking at construction, you're looking at modern methods of construction. We're looking at potential factories within the region in terms of, instead of importing timber frame and things like that, actually developing that programme within the region. So I think it's exciting times, potentially a lot of work, but a lots of opportunities as well for residents in the Vale.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mike and Karen. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I can see we have 2 more hands raised. If Councillor Parker would like to come back in.
Yeah, only just a quick one. I mean, when I was on the cabinet, we had Cardiff and Vale, who had a really good apprentice scheme. And I'm curious to know, do we still have any liaison with them? And quite clearly, unless we actually set up a good scheme where we can actually, maybe at the bottom end of the construction market, allow Mike and his chaps to go out and actually build these things. The lower end of the construction market at the moment, my advice to anybody that I speak with is if you've got a contractor prepared to do the job tomorrow, don't trust him, because every other contractor at the moment is looking at 6 to 9 months and will never give you a fixed price no matter where you are. So maybe Cardiff and Vale could be well worth looking at. So comment from Michael, maybe. Thank you.
Yes, we continue to have an ongoing dialogue with Cardiff and Vale College, and they support us in terms of our own internal apprentice programme within building services.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Michael.
Okay, Councillor Perks.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just suppose wanted to join in the conversation a little bit, really, around training people and things like that. I know that the council does sort of provide training for people on, and takes on apprentices and stuff like that. And I suppose there's more, with the different people, developers, is community benefits that we will get from that as well, that can be helped, can help local people to get involved in stuff as well. And I suppose for further education, what I would say, as somebody who's come from a careers advising background, is we need the money in further education. It's been stripped out of further education, like it's been stripped out of a lot of other places. So the youngsters going on courses need, and it's probably not called an MVQ anymore, but they, could only do an MVQ 1. And then it was trying to get the apprenticeship to move on. And I think that's where the issue is that people can move on to get fully qualified in the skills that we need. And that's why there's the skills gap there. That's why we haven't got the people, sort of following through. We've got a lot of older generation who've time served, who've done different apprenticeships. And we need to make sure that we have in the further education colleges the money and the places for people to carry on and not just do an MVQ 1, but to move on and actually get fully qualified, so that we have got contractors, who can come and do the work for us. So I know that's a bit off our point here, Chair, but I just wanted to sort of add that in, if that was okay.
Okay, no problem. May I ask if yourself and Councillor Parker have finished speaking, that you lower your hands? Councillor Parker, could you? Your hand has gone back up, Councillor Perkins. Councillor Parker, please, can you lower your hand? Just so I don't get confused. Thank you. So, if there's no further comments, I just would like to ask if everybody is happy to accept the recommendation that the Scrutiny Committee consider the position with regards to the 2021-22 revenue and capital budgets.
Happy to accept, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
I can see a few people nodding. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 6 is the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q3 performance 2021-22. I believe that's yourself, Mike.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chair. I'll just take you through this very briefly. As you know, it's a relatively long report with a significant number of appendices. So this is the Q3 progress for the 1st of April to the 31st of December in terms of achievements on the annual delivery plan and our commitments under our corporate plan wellbeing objectives. It's a very positive report, however, which indicates that overall the plan at Q3 is indicating green status. All 4 of our corporate plan wellbeing objectives have been attributed a green performance status at Q3 and reflecting the progress made to date. And I think we acknowledge that given the challenges that we've had in the last year, that's a considerable effort to achieve that. Of the 317 planned activities within our annual delivery plan, 288 of those have been attributed green, 91% of the plan. And I suppose on the other end of that spectrum, only 21 or 7% of our planned activities actually have been attributed a red status. Of those attributed that red status, 38% are a result of service reprioritisation as a result of the ongoing impact of COVID. And in relation to these areas, work is recommencing as part of our recovery plans and our strategy. Of the 43 quarterly performance measures aligned to our corporate plan, 41 of those measures are reported. 56% of them have been attributed a green status. However, 39% have currently been attributed a red status. In relation to the 16 measures that have a red status, the impact of COVID has contributed to 25% of those measures missing target. The report seeks elected members' consideration of the Q3 performance results and the proposed remedial actions. In terms of the report itself, I won't take you through the detail. Perhaps we can reflect on Appendix B and Appendix C, which are highlighted under 1.10 of the report for ease. Mark, I don't know if you are able to share the screen.
Yeah, of course, we'll do, Mike. Was it Appendix B again, was it? Sorry.
Appendix B, please.
Yeah, bear with me a second. Hopefully that has come up for everyone now, I'm hoping.
Thank you. Could you scroll? Perhaps we can enlarge that a little bit, Mark.
Is that large enough, Mike?
I can read it. I'm not sure if members can.
I'll blow it up a bit more now. Bear with me a second. Is that a bit better?
That looks pretty good to me. But if I just lead on some of the things, so these are achievements that have been achieved over the course of the 3 quarters for this scrutiny committee. We fulfilled our pledge to rehouse the Syrian families as part of the United Kingdom Resettlement Service, which I know members have been acutely aware and monitoring that scheme. We've continued to deliver initiatives to get tenants online, so our tablet loan scheme and digital training that we've been undertaking. We continue with a Llanthwyck Major Food Poverty Project, and we're now coming to phase 1 completion. In terms of the area of Objective 2, supported learning, employment, sustainable economic growth, some phenomenal performance there by my community development and Nick's community development team. I think we're extremely proud of the work they've been able to deliver, together with, it's fair to say, a range of partners across the council and external partners. But as you can see by that, 175% of young people through Inspired to Work aimed at supporting young people aged 16 to 24 not NEETs, above target. The work that we've been doing with Communities for Work, 106% of people against target, 183% figures as well. So huge amount of work going on in that area. In terms of supporting people at home and Objective 3, 100% of victims that we support, domestic abuse victims, report feeling safer since we introduced additional safety measures within our homes. The new developments I've mentioned previously, but we're due now in March, handover of 23 new homes at Hayes Road, and the other developments which are ongoing and in place. And in terms of objective 4, respect, enhance, enjoy our environment, I mentioned earlier optimised retrofit projects. So we've been installing a range of fabric first measures together with air source heat pumps and associated technology in a number of our homes, and we're now going through an evaluation process with those tenants, looking at the effect and the impact of that work. We also last week we had the Minister Jane Hutt came to officially open our Penarth food pod, which we're again extremely proud of, and the amount of work and effort from the community development team gone into delivering such an important service for residents, not only in the St Luke's area where the pod is based, but the wider community within in Penarth. And also commitments now. I know that members going back a number of years when we were talking about Welsh Housing Quality Standard, at that stage, we were prioritising work to the inside of our tenants' homes, our kitchens, our bathrooms, our compliance work. But as you can see, what we've started to do now is to actually undertake external works. And you can see a range of projects there that we've either completed and areas of further improvement that we're hoping to undertake over the coming months. I'll leave it there for now, but of course there's an awful lot of material there. Happy Nick and I happy and Mark is happy to take any questions.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Councillor Aviat.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with this report. I'm pleased with everything. So I'd like to thank everybody involved in this. I just want to ask something. During the storms, I noticed there was a few properties damaged, and some of them weren't even our properties. And I know an officer was there during the storm. Can you tell us how council can assist when it's not a council property? What they can actually do to help the tenants? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Aviat. Clearly the council's response, and there was a council-wide response obviously to the 3 storms that we had, one after another. The council set up its emergency planning room, and I was part of the emergency planning room and arrangements on that day. In terms of the activity across the council, there was a huge amount of activity, clearly. Not only in terms of my own staff, in terms of building services, but Marcus's staff in terms of building control. A lot of the issues, a lot of the structural damage and issues that actually occurred, as you say, occurred to private dwellings and private properties. Fortunately, from a council housing perspective, there was very little damage to roofing and structures, although we had a lot of damage, I suppose, incidental slates, tiles, that sort of thing, but a lot of fencing damage. But I think Marcus's team, his building control staff, and others across the council were run off their feet. And as I say, it was over a fairly continuous period from one weekend all the way through to the next, wasn't it? In terms of private properties, a lot of the work that was carried out was carried out, as I say, by staff within building control. In terms of responsibilities from a housing perspective, the council did not have any housing priority emergency requests for housing. We did receive during the day a number of inquiries, but in fact we placed nobody in. We weren't required to place anyone in emergency temporary accommodation. The vast majority of people that we were dealing with were insured, in which case they were going through their own insurers. If they did require housing, they were speaking to family, friends, neighbours. So we actually didn't see any emergency housing requirement at all. In terms of our responsibilities, if those people had required emergency housing, then yes, we would have been obligated to provide, but we would have encouraged people, as I say, to go through their insurers. We were aware of a small number of residents who didn't have buildings insurance. And of course, those people will be in a very difficult position going forward, depending on the level of repairs to their homes. But clearly, we had some issues on private properties in Gibbonsdown, I think, were the worst ones that we attended. There were 3 former council properties in Gibbonsdown where the flat roofs there, the flat roof over 3 properties peeled off. And colleagues from Building Control and Housing attended immediately in order to make safe. So a lot of the work we were doing was around making safe, keeping the public safe. In terms of building services, we took 260 weather-related, storm-related inquiries in building services over the period, and we continue to have the odd call now in terms of people just getting round to reporting. A lot of those were repairs, and of course, during the storms themselves, there was no way that we were in a position to do any roof work or any of that thing. And of course, we've been catching up, I suppose, over the last few weeks in some of that work at ridge tiles, slates, and the like. But as I say, just to point out, I think Marcus's team, there were a number of staff working on the day. From early hours of the morning right through to the 24-hour periods of the storms on a number of days. So great deal of thanks to them, I think.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nugent-Finn.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mike. The slide you just put up, there was a bit I couldn't quite see, Mike, and I'm just wondering if I could ask a question. It might have been on there. This is in terms of preventative housing and homelessness. So again, just direct me really. But I'm having a lot of inquiries about the issue for guarantors if people haven't got previous rental reference. So if they're not necessarily wanting to be rehoused with the Berwick and Morgan, but need to go into the private sector, that's a real issue for a lot of people, Mike. I have referred on to housing support and everything else, but is there any way of getting around this, Mike?
I'm funny enough, I am aware I've been contacted over a very similar issue with somebody returning to the country after a period outside of the country and not having a history, I suppose, a property history.
Yeah.
Yes, we can. We do. Obviously we have our bond. We have a bond scheme, our VAT scheme that provides bonds and rents in advance. In terms of guarantors, clearly, a lot of landlords want some form of history. So again, we can liaise with landlords on residents' behalf. But as I say, ultimately, it will be down to the landlord to determine whether, in the absence of a reference, they're prepared to take somebody on. A number of landlords we work with, though, we work with on the basis of trust, and sometimes if we're able to provide a guarantee or a bond or a in place, that obviously gets us over the line. But I don't think it's an issue that I'm aware of has become a major issue. Nick, I don't know if this is something that's been reflected through the solutions team direct to yourself.
a few anecdotal cases really where we're aware of an issue, but you're right, the private rented sector is a really important sector for us, and we have got really close relationships with a number of landlords who own quite a lot of properties in Barry mainly. So you know, we're looking to build on that and sustain those properties, because you know, things have been quite tricky for private landlords with the changes and the COVID challenges, etc. So you know, we were concerned at one point about private landlords sort of decided to cash out, sell their properties and stop doing that. And of course, that would leave us in a bit of a predicament. We haven't seen the reduction in properties becoming available, but we do tend to work with specific landlords and lettings agents where we can on a case-by-case basis. And you know, we try and be as creative as we can, because you know, we want people to be able to take up private rented properties, because otherwise, if they're not available, you know, they're on the waiting list along with a lot of other people for social housing, really. So you know, we do try and, you know, we've got the preventative monies there to try and use as flexibly as we can to either save existing tenancies or to help people into new tenancies.
Yep. Okay. So I'll email you then, Nick. Is that all right?
Yeah, by all means. Yeah.
Lovely.
If there's any specific details about a case, drop me a line, and I'll have a look into that one and see what we can do.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Do we have any further questions or comments? All right, then I will ask if members are happy to accept the recommendations. There are three. The first is that members consider performance results and progress towards achieving the annual delivery plan 2021 to 22, commitments as aligned to our corporate plan wellbeing objectives within the remit of the committee. The second, that members consider the remedial actions to be taken to address areas of underperformance and to tackle the key challenges identified within the remit of the committee, with their views and recommendations referred thereafter to Cabinet for their consideration and approval. And the third recommendation, that members note the progress being made through our recovery strategy and directorate recovery plans in response to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Is everybody happy to accept those?
Yep. Yeah. Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 7 then, service plans and target setting to deliver the annual delivery plan 2022 to 23. Is that you again, Mike?
It is.
I thought it might be.
I can ask with a little help from Nick, though. I'll ask Nick to go through our service plan and just highlight some of the key activities that are contained within the service plan, if I may. This is a follow-on, I think, really from the last report, in that it's looking at setting our service plan activities and actions for the next annual delivery plan. The report itself, which is in front of you, is asking yourselves to review and endorse via recommendation to Cabinet our service plans, which are attached to Appendix A to the report, and also the planned activities under, as they relate to this particular committee, in Appendix C, and furthermore that Appendix B, which contains service improvement targets for 2022-23, you're also being asked to review and endorse. I won't dwell in terms of, and I know you have, you understand the linkage between the annual delivery plans and the Local Government Election Wales Act we've talked about in the past, and how that links to then the work that we do under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and other corporate objectives and priorities. So just to remind members, Scrutiny considered the draft annual delivery plan in December 2021. Views of Scrutiny committees then referred back to Cabinet, and that was approved by Cabinet then on the 28th of February, and Council accepted that this week. Full Council accepted the ADP this week, the annual delivery plan this week. Within the report that you have in front of you, 4Es, service plans are attached as Appendix A, and proposed service improvements are attached at Appendix B. In terms of Appendix C, Appendix C actually shows how those individual service plan actions link strategically then into the annual delivery plan itself. So it provides that golden thread that I know we've spoken about again in terms of the way that we operate our planning. So within the report, the Housing and Building Services Plan, Marcus's service plan, the service plan for SRS are included within the body of the document. We've tried to align those priorities within the overarching objectives and through the ADP. So you'll see a lot of cross-cutting themes, which obviously are the responsibility of this scrutiny committee from across the council. But first of all, if I can ask Nick really to go through, I suppose, the Housing and Building Services Plan, just to highlight some of the key activities that we're suggesting that we're going to be looking to do next year. And then I suppose Marcus can pick up on any strategic priorities that from his plan that, of course, this scrutiny committee will have sight of as we go forward next year.
Mike, I won't read through every action on the plan because that's there to see really, but just to pick up a couple of issues and a few themes, just to give members a theme of some of the activities that we've identified for next year really. The first is there's a range of actions in there relating to what I would probably sort of summarise as tenant community engagement, particularly important I think post-COVID, because with lockdown we weren't able to be as visible and out and about as we would have previously been. So that's increasingly important now, I think. So some of the things related to that are to implement the actions arising from the tenant participation or tenant engagement strategy. You have seen and approved that strategy fairly recently, but the hard work begins in earnest now really in terms of implementing some of those activities, getting more tenants involved, and probably people from different backgrounds, different demographic groups, and people who wouldn't have traditionally been involved with us before. So there's going to be a really big push really on getting more and more tenants involved in a variety of creative ways next year. There's also a range of actions under tenant engagement on tenant and community engagement relating to food poverty. The food pod at Penarth has already been mentioned, and that's kind of an interesting sort of test case, if you like. Really, we're focusing attention on an estate in St Luke's and St Paul's with a range of interventions there, and hopefully engaging people with to do with food, to do with the environment, to do with employability, all different approaches really. And that model, that area-based approach to community investment really is something that we would look to roll out to other areas and other parts of the Vale as well in future then. So that's an important piece of work for us to take forward next year. And the pod has opened, but there's a lot of work to do in terms of engaging the community, bringing partners into the community, and really sort of making sure that's effective locally. Volunteering clearly is something that we've done a lot of in the past and which was curtailed significantly with COVID, but looking to move on with our time banking scheme, build that and refocus and repurpose that really. So over the course of the next 12 months, we'll be able to see how we get on in terms of coming up with maybe a Vale own or a Vale local approach to volunteering and time credits. One of the criticisms we had with the previous Tempo scheme was that a lot of the benefits, a lot of the incentives were not available to people locally, and very often people weren't in a position to travel great distances, to Cardiff or even London sometimes to sort of use their credits. So a more local Vale scheme is something which we will be looking at. Our tenant profiling exercise also continues next year. One of the things that came to light during the pandemic that our sort of we had lots of information about people, but it wasn't always up to date, or it wasn't always as comprehensive as it could be. So an example of that is where we wanted to sort of target people who were vulnerable, maybe lived on their own, who weren't able to access food and essential supplies. We had some information, we made lots of phone calls and stayed in touch with people, but tenant profiling exercise gives us an opportunity, I think, to gather a lot more detailed information about people's preferences and about people, so we can start to really target and tailor services to tenants. So if we're running employability initiatives or apprenticeships, we can really reach out to those tenants who've indicated that as an area that would be of interest to them. So a lot of work planned really regarding the tenant and sort of the community engagement part of things. An interesting project as well, which is going to happen over the next 12 months, perhaps a little bit longer as well, is the implementation of our new ICT system, housing ICT system, I should say. The system we use at the moment has been around for a long time. I think the late 90s. It's called OHMS, Northgate OHMS, but that system has been creaking for some time, really. So we've gone through a procurement exercise recently and are awarded a contract to a supplier, and the hard work begins now where we have to implement the system. So it's significant changes to the way our data is held, the way staff work, the way tenants access services, really. So from a tenant perspective, one of the exciting developments or opportunities when we've implemented the system is going to be the ability to access services digitally. People can do that at the moment, but it's very limited. Using the new system, I think there's a lot more potential for a lot more people to report repairs and book appointments and bid for properties and do a lot more digitally, really. And the other opportunity it presents to staff really is about remote working. The emphasis has always been for our staff to be out and about on housing estates, visiting tenants, speaking to tenants, and not in the office. I think the new software really gives us that opportunity to have the information at our fingertips and have staff out and about and not tied up in the office doing administration. So there's a project team and a project plan, and a lot of work is going to need to go into the implementation. But that is something that's going to be a key priority over the next 12 months and features in the plan. There are some actions then linked to staff engagement and succession planning of staff. Clearly, it's been a tricky time for staff as well, getting used to home working in a different way. And we've had several engagement events really over the last 12 months. We've termed them internally the big conversation, where we've asked people what has gone well, what has been a challenge, what would we like to see change for the future. And arising from that has been several working groups of staff. We're keen to get staff on board to tell us, give us the feedback and shape things around what they're asking for. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is a more formalised shadowing scheme where staff would shadow colleagues in other teams or other departments to gain new knowledge, different skills, etc. So we're certainly looking at building on that with a view to the recruitment problems across the council were mentioned, and housing's no exception, really. It is quite tricky sometimes to recruit trained, experienced staff. So we're very much looking at our grow your own model, where we can take people in with the right attitude, the right mindset, the right work ethic, and equip them with the knowledge and the skills that they need, and support them so that they can progress with their career in the council. So we don't lose them to housing associations or other councils, really. So that's a piece of work that's going to be really important. There are some actions in the service plan relating to homelessness. The world has changed in relation to homelessness quite significantly. Prior to the pandemic, we didn't have people staying in hotels and B&B accommodation. The numbers of people we're assisting now are hugely increased from what they were previously. And there's changes afoot to the legislation as well. So it's not going to go back to pre-COVID in terms of the legislation and the expectations on us from Welsh Government. So we're having a look at the service delivery. We're going to be looking at the service delivery model to see if that meets our needs going forward, really. So clearly things like prevention are still going to be vitally important, but we've also got a heavy focus on moving people on from temporary accommodation. So, have we got the right numbers of staff doing the right roles, really? So that's an important piece of work relevant to homelessness. I guess another example of another area, perhaps the last area I'll flag up in the plan really is about financial exclusion or financial inclusion. Clearly, things are very difficult for people out there at the moment in terms of increasing fuel costs, petrol costs, cost of living, food, etc. So there's a lot of interventions and a lot of activities planned in relation to money and debt advice, getting people work-ready support, community investment types of initiatives, and also housing-related support as well via the HSG programme. So a number of actions in the plan reflect of that challenge really, and the pressures that people are going to be facing, so that we're agile and can support people in the right way, so that they're not in poverty, they're not running up rent arrears, and they're not potentially at risk of homelessness because they can't afford the rent. So that's going to be a big sort of focus really over the course of the next 12 months. So just a flavour of some of the initiatives, as you've seen in the service plan, there's quite a wide range of actions plans, and if anyone did have any specific questions on any of the individual actions, I'd be happy to try and answer those.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Nick. I can see Councillor Perks has her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Nick, he sort of mentioned, what's happening on with people in their finances at the moment. You said a little bit about you'd be giving money and debt advice. I just wondered whether that is going to be online, or would it be at specific points, or is it going to be at the one-stop shop that you might be doing that sort of stuff?
Yeah, the one-stop shop in Houghton Road it's clearly an important place for us to deliver services. It kind of opened during the pandemic, so it's been a lot to begin with telephone based, but we're hopeful to really get an increase in the footfall and people going in there. At the moment, it's emphasised the housing related support part there, the partners are staff in there, but there's potential clearly to link complementary services in there as well. So a good example of that would be to have money advisors available, to have staff on the housing solutions team, to link in with Homes for You and or private landlords and access and accommodation. But very often when people have issues, there's not just one issue, they're kind of a range of linked issues really. So that one-stop shop on Houghton Road is going to be a really important vehicle for delivering services going forward. But where possible, I think my personal view is that things like money advice work best on a face-to-face basis. Clearly, they've had to go online or over the phone during the last couple of years, but as hopefully we come out the other end of the restrictions, there will be more scope to really build on the face-to-face assistance. We've got our internal money advice team within the income recovery team, where we employ money advisors, and that service is always well regarded, I think, by tenants. So we are continuing with money advice appointments at the moment. We're assisting people who migrate across to universal credit. There's been a lot of people who previously weren't in receipt of benefits, who've always been working and had hours reduced, or unfortunately may have suffered job losses, etc. So we're dealing with it. What we're finding is we're dealing with a lot of people who we haven't dealt with before, and different sorts of issues really. So the money advice team remain a really key element really, and face-to-face where possible. However, if it suits customers to speak to us over the phone and have an appointment and it's a quick query, we'll do that as well. So the digital services transformation, that is something we're looking at, but things like money advice, I think it does tend to work better with a face-to-face conversation with a member of staff rather than filling in a form online.
I agree with you there, Nick, and obviously it's had to be sort of online while COVID's been on, but yeah, that face-to-face thing, they actually, just as they're going out the door, will tell you something else as well, that and that's a good way of picking up things, isn't it, as well as like the money and stuff like that. There could be other things that are happening, and I think you're right there, the opportunity to do face-to-face is good, and the one-stop shop is fantastic. Thank you.
I have Councillor Nugent-Finn next, then another councillor, then I'll come to you, Gina. Okay? So Councillor Nugent-Finn?
Thank you, Chair. I don't mind if Gina wants to go before me.
That's up to you. That's up to you two. Who would like to go first?
Gina, you're very welcome to go before me.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Nick, I know you said that these people are homeless and they're staying in the hotels at Bruce Airport, the Holiday Express hotels. How do they eat and drink?
Yeah, obviously the location of the airport hotels isn't ideal in terms of where they are. There's not, you know, supermarkets or things nearby, but they would just be using the shops. And it's tricky when you're in temporary accommodation in a hotel. There's limited facilities in the hotel for people to cook. So, you know, there are microwave facilities and basic facilities. But people will be, you know, doing the best they can, really. You know, there aren't cookers in the room, for example. You know, there's not gas and electric cookers. There's basic facilities like kettles, toasters, microwave ovens available at the hotel. But yeah, what we would always be trying to do is minimise the length of stay and the amount of time people spent in those hotels. They're mainly single people, I should add. There's not children and families housed at the hotels. If there are families, they're more likely to be accommodated at our own family hostel down in Treharn, where there are better facilities, cooking facilities, linking with sort of the staff there are able to support people with sort of nutritional eating, preparing meals, etc. But it is quite tricky for the people who are at bed and breakfast. I think Mike was probably hoping to come in and make a point there.
It's just to reassure Gina, we have for example, people who were self-isolating, perhaps because of a positive COVID test. We did provide food via the hotels, obviously to enable those people to then self-isolate. But yes, generally it's you know, it's what it says on the tin, is bed and breakfast, and residents obviously are making alternative arrangements then. But we agree, you know, as a council, we were committed to not using bed and breakfast at all prior to COVID. We don't see it as a positive form of accommodation. It's very restrictive. People can't move on, and whilst people are in bed and breakfast for long periods of time, it's an imposition really to a certain extent in terms of how they move forward. You know, so it is emergency housing. That's what it's providing for. We provide that emergency accommodation. But if there were individuals, more vulnerable individuals, I'm sure the Housing Solutions staff look at tailored solutions for people who specifically may have had specific needs. And I'm sure we will have picked those up over the time. But as I say, yes, it has been challenging.
Yes.
What we do as well, Gina, is that as well as the bed and breakfast accommodation, we have lots of rooms in shared properties. So we will tend to move people around and be flexible to meet people's individual requirements. Clearly, in a shared property, you might only have your own room, but there'll be a full kitchen available there. So if people had any sort of dietary requirements or any difficulties or find it hard at the hotel, we would look at accommodating those individuals into shared accommodation as soon as practically possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Councillor Nugent-Finn, if you'd like to come in now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two things, sorry, just want to make the point just on the back of what Gina said and listen to Nick and Mike. It's a real fine balance, isn't it, between sort of creating dependency as well, because, you know, we need to keep supporting people in these accommodations, but it's still, you know, in an empowering manner. So it's again, it's not creating that dependency, isn't it? We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can in preparation for move on. I guess that's all part of the visiting and everything else, isn't it? So yeah, I'm sure that's happening. Mike, the Pobble, we remember when we had the presentation, and then we had all the, you know, horrendous couple of years in between it. Remember that? I wonder if we can relaunch it in some way. I remember speaking on this committee and saying, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could have some sort of, something on Holton Road, just to sort of really showcase what's going on there. I'm signposting every other day, but it's still not as well known as I'd like it to be. I know it's difficult. I know it's pressure and time and commitment on your staff, but I think it would be very well invested, and I would support it 1,000,000% in any way, shape or form. Anything you need in order to get that out there. Leave it with you for tonight, folks. But yeah, I would really welcome that in the future if possible.
I think you're quite right. As I recall, there was going to be an official launch. I think it was in the March of 2019, was it? 2020? It
was 2020, if I remember rightly. It got called off for COVID.
It was called off. That's right, in the first lockdown. So yeah, we'll actually, because as I recall, there was in terms of communication and engagement strategy, there was a lot of work to be done around that. Yeah. Which of course we've sort of fallen into a sort of hybrid way of working through the one-stop shop over the last 2 years. I'm sure Pobble would be really pleased to have some sort of official launch, Nick. I'm sure we've spoken to Pobble recently, and I'm sure they are planning to do so.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, when Pobble last came and spoke to this committee, they did say that they had to delay the launch because of COVID. But once all guidelines and certain cases had reached certain numbers, etc., they would look at doing another proper launch, rescheduling the official launch. So, sorry, Nick, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, Nick.
Oh. If it's helpful, I can link with Lorraine, who's the manager of Pobble and looks after the one-stop shop, and progress those conversations and get a date in the diary to do the formal launch.
Great. Thanks all. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no worries. Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard a lot of positive things about the food pod in Penarth, and I see we're talking to Lantwit as well, and in the first phase. Are they connected, and is a food pod likely to follow in Lantwit, or are there differences between the two? Thank you.
Hi, Chair. I don't mind sort of starting to try and answer that. Councillor Hanks, they're separate groups at the moment. There is a group specifically looking at food poverty in Lantwit, and some different people around the table as part of those conversations. I think what we've done at Penarth is a more of a housing-led initiative, really. But we are looking at the approach to food poverty across the Vale to take the sort of lessons learned from both areas, really, and the good practice, and try and sort of think about how that is rolled out. It's possible that we could look at food pods in different areas. I don't think that was our intention necessarily. However, if there are local needs and things arising from the conversations, that would be something we take on board. But I think it's more as a means of engagement really in Penarth. I'm not incited to the conversations specifically in Lantwit. I'm not part of that group. But I don't think they're looking at a food pod and following the Penarth model anyway.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Okay, if there are no more comments,
Chair, you're
Marcus
muted.
has his hand up, so if he would like to come in.
Chair, it was only really quickly. Did you want me to really quickly? There's only a couple of items from the service plan for regeneration and planning, which relate to this committee. So, if you don't mind, do you want me to run through those? There's only 3 of them, I think. So,
yes, of course.
That's fine. So, I'll fly through these and take questions afterwards. The first item relates to the disabled facilities team and an element of work where we're working with colleagues in social services and housing to conduct a review of the 3 separate adaptation teams with a view to achieving on implementing changes to improve efficiencies across the service. So building on the successes of all of those teams, but to try and break down the barriers perhaps which sometimes exist between the private sector public sector and actually our social services colleagues through their involvement through occupational health and that sort of thing. So we are working currently with a change manager who's been appointed by social services to help in that process, and we're hoping that we're going to get a report back to discuss in the next few weeks and possibly implement in the new financial year. So that's the first item. Second item is around increasing the supply of good quality, accessible, affordable housing by maximising opportunities of the planning system through the Section 106 process, essentially. But obviously, as Mike alluded to, there are going to be issues, I think, going forward around viability. We currently, and as you know, we're not yet seeing what's happened recently in Ukraine building into the system yet, but I suspect we are going to see a lot more house builders using viability and the increasing costs as a justification for limiting their provision of Section 106 and ultimately provision of affordable housing as part of the process. So we're going to have to be aware of that going forward. However, you know, we have very robust systems in the Vale for assessing that. And again, it's a key priority in our service plan to ensure that those properties are delivered. And then finally, obviously within the team, I have colleagues delivering the council's empty property management service. They're supported by considerable advice and funding now from Welsh Government, and they have been doing a great job in terms of looking at those empty properties throughout the Vale and bringing them back into use and taking enforcement action and indeed direct action when they need to. So that's the third key item which really relates to this committee's agenda. So happy to take any questions about any of those.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Councillor Parker, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus has raised the obvious that if you look at the Darren Farm development where 40%, 192 houses are going to be provided, that now probably will not be sustainable. One of the things we need to look at, I think, is that on the lower end where you have 1 to 5 houses, the affordable housing requirement is actually stopping most small builders coming forward. And on the LDP, maybe I'll put a plug forward to say to Marcus, a bit of care and consideration on that might help matters. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. If you could lower your hand, please.
Chair, just in response to that, which it's a valid point. Obviously, we're about to start the local development plan review, which will look at all policies, including the policy which Councillor Parker referred to. So, as part of that process, which will take around about 4 years, there will be a lot of work done around viability and what we're asking for in terms of our Section 106 requirements, including situations in respect of 1 to 5 houses and how that's affecting the market. So that will be assessed as part of the review process.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments on agenda item 7? Okay, so are we happy to go with the recommendations? There are 2 of them. Yes?
Happy
yes,
to
Chair.
move.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. So the next item is agenda item 8, task and finish group, housing and homelessness provision within the Vale of Glamorgan.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll be taking this report. Bear with me a second. Basically, thank you for that, Chair. The reports provided to committee tonight are basically the culmination of the work undertaken by the task and finish group, as supported by council officers and other stakeholders and interested parties, which was originally set up about a year or so ago in early 2021 to look at housing and homelessness provision as part of the Vale of Glamorgan's council's recovery from COVID-19, and obviously we've already touched on some of those issues already in the service plans, which Mike and Nick have obviously alluded to, some of the issues around homelessness provision going forward. Just sort of the summary of the covering report for the main report, which is in Appendix 1. The report asks the committee to consider and endorse the findings and recommendations of the main report on Appendix 1 for housing and homeless provision within the Vale of Glamorgan by the Task and Finish Group, and for it to be subsequently referred on to Cabinet. The main report outlines the key areas and themes around current and future housing and homelessness provision, with the challenges faced in progressing this by Council, Welsh Government, local authorities and partners also set out. In terms of the covering report, the main recommendations are that the committee considers and endorses the findings of the main report, and that, subject to any additional comments or recommendations the committee may wish to add tonight, that the report be referred on to Cabinet for its consideration and endorsement. We also have another recommendation in order for sort of any further actions and taken up as a result of it being referred on to Cabinet, that this committee receives an update report in approximately about 12 months' time. And obviously, once that up-to-date report comes on to committee, that be referred on to Cabinet as well, in order that we've got a monitoring regime on any actions that are taken up as a result of it. In terms of the main report itself, hopefully, committee members have had a chance to have a look at it. The main part, I guess, of interest are the main recommendations of the report in Appendix 1. We have about 12 recommendations there that we intend to pass obviously on to the committee tonight and then on to Cabinet. I don't know if it would be useful for me to go through all those, or if members are happy that they've had a look and they've considered them. But like I say, we do have a number of recommendations which tie in really to what has been said previously by Nick and Mike around the service plans around the housing and homelessness provision. So we have various recommendations such as building and developing the housing first approach towards people who are homeless and other vulnerable groups. Again, as been discussed previously, another recommendation ties in with modern methods of construction, and also the example of the intensive wraparound support as seen at the Court Road development. Again, another issue that's been raised previously at the meeting was around ensuring greater provision for accommodation for older persons. As part of that, in order to increase downsizing opportunities for older tenants, and thereby also freeing up accommodation to be used by other persons in other demographics that might be currently in suitable sort of types of accommodation. Also looking at a review of current assets and existing housing, for example, around the de-designation strategy in order to increase the supply of single persons housing. Also, another recommendation alludes to investigating at a regional level the potential of collaborating with other local authorities in order to purchase modern methods of construction units and to develop those, thereby ensuring the most economical use of monies are made for each local authority, and to obviously increase the pace and scale of social housing for homeless clients as well. We've also got a recommendation around building and developing existing stock around, carbon neutral aspects. Also considering possibly prioritising local residents during the first phase of housing allocation, particularly at rural sites. And then obviously if that demand isn't there, to look at allocating housing to other residents within the Vale of Glamorgan where there's greater demand. as also alluded to previously in the meeting, about the council, and obviously an issue that was raised by Councillor Nugent-Finn, about developing and expanding the opportunities around the one-stop shop provision at Halton Road, with a great inclusion of third sector services, including obviously POBL. And as in conjunction with that, as well as promoting and publicising those services widely to all residents within the Vale, and help towards, providing housing support and part of those preventative measures around increasing homelessness. Final sort of recommendation. On a sort of practical level, that the council develops a land disposal protocol which prioritises the disposal of surplus council-owned land for new council house building, in addition to purchasing land within the private market, and also for council officers to liaise with Welsh Government officials regarding surplus in other areas of surplus public sector land. So those are the main recommendations. Obviously, the report also goes into the background and the findings of the various submissions that were made over the course of the year to the Task and Finish group. I'll leave it there because obviously it's quite a large scale report and it's wide ranging, but those are the sort of key areas. And it is really sort of now sort of opening it up for any questions or comments from the committee. Chair, if I hand back to you.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. I can see Councillor Parker has his hand up.
I would say, at the end of the day, it's a heck of a portfolio there, and I move the recommendations that we actually accept all that has come forward.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Perks, you were the chair of this, weren't you?
Yes.
Of this task group. So,
Yeah.
if you'd like to
So I would like to say something, but I would like to second that we accept the recommendations. But yeah, I mean, this was a cross-party Task and Finish group with also representative of the Tenants Association as well, who was the deputy chair of this Task and Finish group. And we did look into everything thoroughly. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mark Thomas for the sort of corralling us and making sure we had the people there to speak, but also to thank Mike Ingram and Nick Jones and all the staff from housing who came along and informed us, because we were starting our knowledge base. We needed to learn fast, and they definitely helped. We had legal there, 106 officer there, Welsh Government, Shelter, Pobble, Newydd, everybody came, which was really good because I think this is quite a thorough sort of report in some ways. I think over those 12 months, we have gone into the various different aspects of, who our homeless people are, what their needs are, and matching that in with what Welsh Government want as well, which, sort of the officers actually helped us with that. So I think the actual recommendations sort of go from recognising, who needs housing, to what support the people who are getting the housing need, to the types of housing we need to build, to the actual, the carbon neutral housing that we're going to have, the modern methods of construction, which is absolutely superb, that we're, the council's award winning. I'm not making that up, am I, Mike? The one in Court Road, award winning. Yes, you're saying yes, that's good. So things like that. I think it was a good opportunity, even though we had this terrible pandemic. It gave us the opportunity to really look into what is homelessness, find the hidden homeless people and what their needs are, and hopefully not go back to having street homeless people in the Vale anymore with this, the different policies, legislation and procedures that the Vale have. So yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody who was on the committee, all their input towards getting the recommendations together, and I hope that the Housing and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee can accept what we've done and recognise that the hard work that's gone into this. So yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perks. I'd like to echo your sentiments as well. I was also on this task force, and the help we've received from council officers in whichever role they've been in has been absolutely invaluable. We couldn't have done this without them. So I just want to say thank you myself as well. Please pass that thanks on. Okay, we've had someone propose that we accept and move, and we've also had a seconder. Does anybody else have any other comments they would like to make before we go forward? Go on, Mike.
Can I commend the report? The report is an extremely thorough professional report, and as I say, from my perspective as head of service, absolutely assists me and helps me in terms of delivery of services for the homeless and residents in the Vale. So I welcome the recommendations and the committee's agreement with those recommendations today. I think it will hold us in good stead going forward. As we know, we will be doing our best to eradicate homelessness as far as possible, or to minimise it as far as possible. And certainly, we've been thrown a number of challenges in the last couple of years that has, I suppose, tested our ability to respond. And whilst the report as written is extremely will be extremely useful, there will be further reports clearly coming to Scrutiny Committee and to Cabinet in the coming months, because clearly the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine and the huge refugee crisis particularly will, I'm sure, as we understand, a commitment from UK government to assist as many people as we can. That will clearly fall on, a lot of that work will fall on some of our residents, who will potentially be putting themselves forward for sponsorship opportunities. But clearly the local authority will have a major role in terms of responding to the ask when it comes, as we've done with the Syrian refugees and as we've done with friends from Afghanistan more recently. That doesn't change the emphasis or the influence of the report. It probably does change the numbers in terms of people that we will be looking potentially to assist. But as I say, I think that's a very, very fluid situation at the moment. We don't know what the UK final position will necessarily be. That's obviously being debated and discussed as we speak, I suppose. I know that Welsh Government, for example, under the Nation of Sanctuary, are very committed to assisting as far as possible for local authorities in Wales to assist in the provision. And I know that from the Welsh Local Government Association, there has been a commitment to, again, to harness the work of councils across Wales to respond. But I think it's just worth just mentioning that, as I say, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it affects the report. It's just that I think that we will have other issues that we may well need to consider as a scrutiny and as a council as we move forward over the coming months. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Mike. You do raise some very, very valid points. And this is something that hopefully will help with the council in future regarding those points as well. I'd also like to say that I know somebody who up until recently was in a hotel in temporary accommodation. I think it was the Celtic International he was at, and he's recently, literally a couple of days ago, as of Monday, moved into one of the units in Court Road, and he's loving it. He is absolutely loving it. So there we go. I didn't even know he was going there. I haven't seen him for a very long time. So yes, he's loving it. That we've had some very positive feedback from those anyway, and I thought I would just let you know that I know one of the residents now, and he's agreeing with everything that's been said about them before. Okay. So if there are no other comments, we've already had someone propose and second that we go with the recommendations. Is everybody happy with that?
Happy we note.
Okay. Well, I have
just to say, Chair,
Yeah.
that obviously following the committee approving the recommendations, this will be referred on to Cabinet, and
Yes.
we'll be going to Cabinet on their next meeting on the 14th.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 9 is any urgent items from myself under part 1. I have none. I have no urgent items under part 2 either. So all I can say to you now is thank you very, very much for coming. And that the next meeting of this committee is Wednesday, the 6th of April. So enjoy the rest of your evening and thank you for your time.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Chair.